The Play's the Thing, with your host, Judy Sleed. Special guest, Reverend Alison Cornish. Underwritten by the East Hampton YMCA, Paul Brennan and Imaginations, Inc. Now here's Judy.
Oh, okay. Welcome again to The Play's the Thing. And today I have a real nice playmate, Alison Cornish, who is a minister, reverend at the Unitarian Church that I happened to wander into once, and I'm just keep going. And the main attraction is Alison. I love the way you talk and what you say. You are so clear and informative, and so much enthusiasm in your voice.
Well, thanks.
So let us hear your voice.
Well, it's great to be here, Judy, and it's been wonderful to get to know you a little bit as part of the congregation, as you moved from taking care of our youngest into full life of the congregation. It's been great. So I'm anxious to know what's on your mind and what you want to know more about, either about the congregation or about the tradition of Unitarian Universalism or about me. It's up to you.
Very good. Now you gave me a whole hour.
That's
full
right.
of
That's
questions.
right. That's right. Start wherever you start.
Well, I would like to know, first of all, where you're from.
Originally, well, I grew up in Connecticut, not too far from here, as the crow flies, in central Connecticut, and I grew up in a small town called Manchester, just outside of Hartford. Public schools, and I grew up in the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Hartford, so I'm a long-time member of this tradition.
Oh, that's the only
faith I've ever been a part of. Yeah.
Well, that's good. So at least you're not confused.
Well, that's true about that. I may be confused about other things. But I'm unusual in that aspect because, as you may know, about 90% of the people in our congregation come from other religious traditions. They grew up in the Catholic Church or in the Jewish synagogue or Lutheran, or maybe not with any tradition at all. And as adults decide that they want to have a religious tradition of some kind. About 10% of us actually grew up in this tradition and stuck with it. Yeah.
Well, I didn't even know it existed until I went there I answered a job description.
That's right. Yep. We have a pretty low profile as a tradition, but we've been around in this country for about 200 years or so, and even longer when we go back to our European roots in England and in Northern Europe. But it's a small tradition, and in fact on Long Island there are only about 12 Unitarian Universalist congregations from here to Queens. So
yeah, but so few people know about it.
That's true. It's part of that is because we don't evangelize, we don't proselytize. In other words, we don't go out and try to convert people to this tradition. Pretty much we wait for people to find us, like you found us.
Like I did.
Right, and it's not for everyone. Not every religion is for everyone, but we have a reputation of being questioning people who are on a journey or a search, who are not necessarily confined by a certain kind of answer. And that's not for everyone. Some people want more definitiveness, or direction, right?
To follow something.
Exactly.
Because this is like, it fits everybody. You don't have to do anything except just like the normal thing, to be honest and nice and not to fight. But
and that in itself can be a hard task. Well, what I like to say about Unitarian Universalism is that we agree on ethics, but we vary in the path that we take to get to those ethics. For example, we all agree that each individual person, each individual human being has inherent worth and dignity. Now, you might follow a Christian path and come to that particular conclusion, or you might follow a Buddhist path and come to that particular conclusion, or you might come from an atheistic path and come to that conclusion. And it doesn't matter how you've come to that conclusion. The point is that we all come to that conclusion together. And the fact that you might have had a journey that looks very different from my journey is in fact a very exciting and interesting thing to us. I like to say that, you know, we could all go off to the back room of Borders and we could all take off our individual books on spirituality or world religions or whatever, and we could read it to ourselves and we could be very happy. But as Unitarian Universalists, we choose to do that in community, sitting side by side with one another, and that makes the journey much richer.
It is. Every time when I go there, you always have something worthwhile to say.
Well, thank you for that.
Especially last week was you were talking about what was that, gluttony?
Greed. Right. We're doing the 7 deadlies right now.
Yes. I mean, it was so true. Everything. I was going to ask you. I'm curious. How do you prepare your what do you call it, sermon? Do you take it from several books, or do you write it by yourself? Or I was wondering, because there's so much now, it looks like it's a lot of knowledge in there. You take it from all over and you combine it very well. So where does it come from?
Well, that's a great question, and not one that people ask me very often. It does come from all over. First of all, if you're going to preach, you have to preach about something that matters to you. And you have to preach about something that you've struggled with yourself, because otherwise it's not authentic. Otherwise it becomes preaching in quotation marks. You're just trying to tell people something that you really haven't experienced yourself.
Well, as I said, I noticed that you talk enthusiastically, which means that you actually believe in what you're saying.
Well, in the example of greed, I had made this decision at the beginning of the year that I wanted to talk about the 7 deadly sins over the course of several months, because I think that we have great fun pointing at other people and saying, oh, look at their sin, but we have a harder time turning that on ourselves. And the greed one was really interesting to research. I decided that I wanted to approach that from a Buddhist perspective, because I thought that the Buddhists have a very interesting idea that greed is a poison. It's not something that we commit like a sin, but it's a poison in our environment, and therefore it's affecting all of us in ways that, you know, like a toxicity, we really don't even know until suddenly we find ourselves acting differently than we perhaps want to be acting. So once I got the perspective that I wanted to take from the Buddhist perspective, I do some research in the library, some research on the internet. I talk to friends, I talk to family. I don't tell them that I'm doing research. I think about my own life and where I've struggled. I try to wrap story in it. I mean, sort of the center story in this sermon was a 1979 speech that Jimmy Carter had made that I've found to be quite moving and quite provocative. And through the miracle of the internet, you can get a full text of a 1979 Jimmy Carter speech to really examine.
You actually remembered that?
Well, I found a reference to it. I had remembered the speech, but then when I was doing my research, I found a reference to it. I thought, oh, that would be really interesting to draw on at this point. Jimmy Carter's really one of my heroes, and I think some of the work that he's doing right now is amazing. And so it evolves. I guess that's what I'm saying. It evolves. But,
yeah, it was because as I was listening, I heard different, different. It looked like you were taking it from different places, and I was wondering, where does she get all this material? How much time it is to research, and it was really marvelous. And
well,
especially when you say, we all think it's the other person's fault. It's not ours, whatever we're doing. And I mean, it was just so true. I could have listened to you, I mean, even more than what you are.
Thank you.
And it's all the time, because and when you read those stories to the children, oh my gosh, everybody's ears, not only the children, but all the adults are listening. The way you deliver those words.
Well, stories. You know, stories are underrated, and I know you're a writer, and you've written for children as well as for adults, but I think something that's very attractive in the world's religious traditions is narrative, is story, is, you know, the people who have lived real lives and had things happen to them and had to meet challenges. And I think we learn by story and by narrative. And you're right, the adults key in. It's very common for adults to say to me at the end of a service, what I liked best was the story. And then you say, okay, I'll just put the sermon aside. But no, I think we're hungry for story. I think we really long for good stories. Stories that are not moralistic or filled with piety, but stories that really sort of tickle something inside of us and say, wow, if I were in that situation, what decision would I have made? Or it helps us see things from a different perspective rather than just our habitual perspective. I think if I were not a minister, I would be a storyteller.
Well, you are.
Well, thank you. That's right.
And I guess you just go to the library and pick a book yourself, or do you research that?
I research that too.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have a wonderful children's book bibliography that was put together by a fellow Unitarian Universalist minister, and he's pulled out sort of the basic theme from each of these children's stories. You know, if you're looking for a story about diversity, or if you're looking at a story about grace,
that's
or you're
great.
looking
now
at a story...
I know where to go.
That's right. That's right. That helps me a lot. It helps me a lot. Yeah.
So now you are with this within a congregation, but you were working elsewhere before that.
Well, I'm a fairly new minister. Even though I'm a lifelong Unitarian Universalist, my first career was in architectural history and historic preservation. So I worked in that field after getting a couple of degrees for about 20 years. And then I went back to school to become a minister. So it was 4.5 more years of school. And then I've been a minister now for about 2.5 years. So,
well, that's quite a career change.
Yes, it is quite a career change.
What possessed you to choose this career?
Well, it's a good question, and you know, how many hours do you have? But I have always felt a call to the ministry. I've always felt a call to serve. But I also love historic buildings. I love art and the history of art, and I think for me at least, I felt that there was a certain amount of lived experience that was required before one stepped forward and said, I could minister to other people. You know, I have nothing at all but admiration for people who are 25, 26 years old and decide to go into the ministry. But when I was 25 or 26 years old, I didn't have the maturity, I didn't have the life experience, I didn't have the self-confidence that I really would have needed to do that kind of work. But I loved history, and I loved architecture, and I loved being a woman in a field that was mostly men.
I see.
And it worked well for me for like I say, 20 years.
I picked up on that you like history, which is good, but what's architecture has to do with the church? With the, excuse me, it's not a church.
Oh, the meeting. Ours is a meeting house, right?
Yes.
Well, actually, it's interesting that you say that, because when I was training for my to work on old buildings, what's called conservation, I took my degree in England.
England?
Yeah, in York, in England. And my thesis, my master's thesis, was on the conservation of churches and chapels, and that is how do you take an historic place that has been made sacred by so many years of continuous religious use, and how do you update it, or how do you make it appropriate for the people who are living in this day and age, and not lose that connection and that deep thread to history. I find that to be very interesting and very exciting work, because you have to talk with people about traditions and change and attachment. And people get very emotional about buildings. They get very attached to exactly the way it's always looked and always felt. And it was very, very interesting work. It's not just about fixing the roof or putting an addition on. It's actually about engaging a group of people about questions of change.
Well, I love all that myself. I always wonder what was here before and who was there and what did they do.
Yeah.
And that's part of his. But you mentioned you went to England.
Yes, to do my first graduate
Well,
work.
how did you get to England from Connecticut?
Well, by way of.
Yes.
After I finished high school in Connecticut, I went for a while to school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And then
Of all the places.
Of all the places, exactly. Of all the places, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And then I left there and finished up my undergraduate work in Massachusetts, in Wellesley, at Wellesley College. And then I went off to work for a contracting company, actually, that only worked on old buildings. They were up in New Hampshire, and their work was extremely varied. They were working on a museum one day and a horse barn the next day and a stone bridge the day after that. I loved working there. And then I went off on my own and did some of my own preservation consulting work, and I sort of hit the limits of my knowledge and realized that I needed to go back to school and get more information, again, more confidence. And it was an opportunity to go to England and study for a year and meet people from all over the world. My classmates were from Algeria and Australia and New Zealand and Greece and Finland and Japan. It was wonderful. It was really wonderful. And,
was there any one particular person who said, well, okay, Alison, do this? Or was it all on your own?
Oh, I've had so many mentors in my life. I have been gifted with terrific mentors.
Yeah, that is important.
It really
Yeah, it is.
And, you know, some of them I could name, and some of them are probably, you know, it was a passing remark that changed my outlook about something and let me see myself in a different light. But going to England, I think, was really, it was my choice. It was supported by the people around me, but it was my choice. And then once I got there, I did find sort of new mentors and new teachers, and yeah, it was terrific. It was just a wonderful time.
You took the right path because you ended up in the right place.
You know,
Thank goodness.
when you look back, it all looks like it just lined up, one thing after another. In the midst of it, it was a little more tumultuous, but it was good. It's very good. Yeah.
So, you know, the name of this program, The Play is the Thing. You are familiar with that line.
Yep. Yep.
So did you ever think about doing something on the stage?
Well, my first college major actually was theater design. I was going to be a theater designer. Never in front of the cameras. This is unusual for me. Always behind the
Is this
scenes.
the first time?
No, I have been on some other television programs, but I did start out in theater, and I would say that some of the lessons I learned in theater are things that still guide me in my life today. Absolutely. It's to have gone through high school and part of college and summer stock. I worked summer stock a couple of seasons. I would say that theater is a great grounding for life.
It is.
It really is. Yeah.
Yes. I've been, it's not that I'm an actor, but I've done a lot of things in theater and always encourage other people to do it. It gives you a new perspective on life and makes you more, you realize more that you are.
But it's the irony, isn't it? By taking on a role or by taking on something other than who you are, you learn more about who you are.
Yes.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
It's counterintuitive, but it's true. It's true.
Right.
Yeah.
So would you encourage other people to do what you're doing?
In terms of what? In terms of...
To be a minister.
Oh. You know, that's a really good question, Judy. I think that everybody has a call in life, has a vocation in life. And I wish that I could say that we live in a time and in a place where young people are encouraged to discover what that vocation and call is and then to pursue it, sort of in an uncomplicated way, and in an unforced way. I find myself very fortunate that I was able to turn to my true call and vocation while I'm still young enough to engage in it and to learn from it and to serve in it. I think one of the saddest things is when people don't have an opportunity to find that. Ministry is very challenging work. You need to be sort of chameleon-like. I mean, you need to be a pastor and be with people through the dark times. You need to be a prophet and speak to the social injustice that surrounds us. You need to be a teacher and be able to educate people about their own religion and other religions. You need to be a preacher and be able to communicate from the pulpit. You need to be an administrator and help an organization sort of have financial stability and direction and goals. You need to be a colleague to other people who are working in the field. So it's not for everyone. It clearly isn't for everyone. But what I would encourage people, I was 40 when I decided to go back to school.
Really? You hardly look 20.
I know that. Someday I'll actually feel good about that. But you know, and it was not easy. I wished that I had, you know, more brain cells or more patience with education than I did when I was 40 years old. But I would still encourage anyone to make that turn in their lives rather than say, oh, I'm too old, or I'm too set in doing what I'm doing, or, you know, I can't change now because... I would always encourage people to take that risk and take that leap, whether it's into ministry or whether it's into law or whether it's into becoming a stay-at-home parent rather than a working parent, whatever it is. If there's a longing in there or a yearning, then...
Yeah, a lot of people are afraid of the unknown.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you if do you have a lot of calls like for personal counseling?
Some. You know, that depends on the congregation. I have been in other congregations where there's more connection that way or more need that way. We have quite a self-sufficient congregation where we are, where people minister to one another quite well. And I mean, as you know, in being in this sharing circle, this small group
that's
ministry,
really wonderful.
That people reach out to one another and help one another along, and that certainly helps the minister because you know that people are looking after one another's interests and helping each other out.
Right.
But I do get calls, and I try to be of help. I'm not a trained therapist, but I am.
But you know how to listen.
That's right.
That's the main thing. A lot of people don't even look for answers. They just, sometimes when you talk about what is the problem, you find it yourself as you speak about it.
Right. Well, you may have been in my office where over the couch there's a great big poster with the words, listen. And it is probably the most important thing I do, Judy, is just to listen.
Just to listen.
Just to listen to people,
So is this about the third or the fourth place where you are working?
Actually, well, it depends. If you count my internship, it would be the third. It's the second congregation that I've served.
Because when you came to this one, you were only a part-time, because you were...
Right, and I'm still only part-time.
I thought you were full-time.
No, still only part-time. Well, that's partly due to the fact that we're a small congregation and our resources are a little limited. As you know, we've just moved into this new building, or almost a year ago now, we moved into a new building. And for the congregation to both handle the expenses of being in a new building and the expenses of staff and other things, right now, half-time or a little bit more than half-time is what the congregation and I agree balances the resources best. So you're right. I was serving another congregation half-time as well. And
yeah, I noticed, but I thought somebody said that after a certain time you're going to be full-time. You will be full-time.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed, yeah.
And then I was surprised when one day they said, okay, Alison is not going to be here, somebody else is going to be here.
Yeah.
Well, I really, I can't tell you, again, I told you so many times how much I enjoy your sermons. They're so alive. And
Wow, I appreciate that. I do.
Not everybody, but somebody else I heard saying that you know, she loves the way you do the service.
Well, I like preaching a lot. It's a lot of work, as you pointed out, you know,
Yes.
and preparing for these things. And there's also, preaching is about giving voice to something that you know goes on in more people than just yourself. And I think that's successful preaching, is when you say you resonate with something that I said, and somebody else who's very different from you also says that they resonated with what I've said. And that's not going to happen every week for every person, but the idea that people can carry something into the week from Sunday morning, I think is very important.
It's really wonderful. Well, I'm so glad that you were able to come. I think this is the third time we tried to
That's
get
right.
together.
The scheduling is not easy, is it?
No.
Yeah.
And half hour is up.
Wow, look at that.
Isn't that something? So
Goes quickly.
I want to thank the crew, and I'm going to say goodbye, everybody.
And I get to say
Until
goodbye,
next
too.
time, yes. And just look for the Plays the Thing on Channel 20, and we are even in New York. That's not Channel 20. And a lot of places. All you have to do is just look at the scheduling. And next week we're going to have another guest. And this was really, I'm so happy we got together to do this.
Well, thank you, Judy, for your temerity. Really appreciate this. Thank you.
Yes, and me too. And this is, the whole thing is sticky.